Okay.
So let's also welcome Chloe. So Pietro, can you tell us, discuss a little bit your recent or more or older papers on the links and the convergences between systemic and family therapies and the Deleuzian thinking?
Yeah.
We can have a discussion. I mean, I can moderate.
Yeah. So how to start? Well, I would like to start with the 1000 plateau, with the 1000 plateau. Even though recently I was finding something that I was thinking to tell you today about the appendix of the logic of sense, particularly the first part of the appendix, particularly the confrontation between Deleuze and Lucretius. And so the discussion between Democritus and Epicurus and Lucretius, who is a follower of Epicurus, about the clinamen, the word clinamen, which is a word that is wide used in Lacanian psychoanalysis, but I think it is not connected with Deleuzian thinking. But now let's start with the more obvious connection. The more obvious connection between Deleuze and even Guattari. You find it in 1000 plateau, in 1000 plateau, when Deleuze and Guattari retranslated in French a phrase that is connected with an experience of Gregory Bateson. The experience of Gregory Bateson was the experience he made with Margaret Mead in Bali. He went to Bali and he found a situation that he didn't contemplate before. So he changed his position as an anthropologist, as a social scientist, after staying in Bali and watching the way in which the children were raised up in Bali. So he found that the way in which the children were raised up in Bali was different from the way in which in the Western society the children are raised up. So, and he went in a kind of observation that was an observation that he found after taking a lot of pictures. So he was taking sequences of pictures in Bali, sequences of interaction. This is the reason because after that, Deleuze was very interested in movies, also because he was connected with the idea of Bali in Bateson and in Antonin Artaud, because also Antonin Artaud was interested in the theater of Bali, and there are very similar considerations about the Bali theater in Bateson and in Antonin Artaud, but the way in which the mother was raising up the child was in the description of Bateson like this. The mother titillates the penis of the child sometimes, and the child gets an erection and goes to the mother in a position of hugging her, to be tied to her, and the mother makes this movement to reject him and mocking at him. And after that, he becomes furious about it. And the mother, again, he became furious. And so he tried to wound the mother in some way. And the mother, again, rejecting, laughing, and so on. And this is a kind of circularity for Bateson. And this way of treating the child, he said, could be linked to the fact that in Bali, the way of interacting people are very different from the way he was thinking when he was in New Guinea, and he was watching at another group of people that were called Yatmul. So he was thinking...
Pietro, may I interrupt you a little bit?
Yeah.
All of us are hearing a lot of parasites, and we all have our microphones closed.
Oh, I see.
Maybe, do you have a problem on your side or anything? Or
No, I have no problem now. Are you listening to me?
Yes, with some parasites. We are listening to you. I can listen to you, understand what you're saying, but there are some parasites. I think everyone.
What do you mean?
A little bit of noise. Interrupted the noise.
Oh, I see. So let me see something about it. Impostazioni, video and audio, effetti. I don't know how to deal with this recording. I'm not an expert on this, so sorry for this. Microphone, book air, Microsoft. Let's.
Do you have your I don't know,
Zoom
maybe
audio device. Let me try to go. Are you listening to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Is everyone listening? Can listen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, now no.
No.
Not now.
Oh.
Pietro, no. You changed something and we cannot listen to you.
Me now? Are you listening to me now?
Yes, better, much better.
Okay. So let's see if there are less parasites.
At least now, no parasites.
Okay. Let's hope to go on like this. So I was in the moment in which Gregory Bateson was changing his idea about something that was what he was calling escalation or schismogenesis, changing his mind and seeing that in Bali at least there was another way of interacting. That was the way in which a continuous plateau of intensity substitute the climax, substitute the escalation, and then there is a kind of plateau continuous of intensity. This thing was attributed behind or beyond Bateson, was attributed to something that has to do with the Oriental way of living in some way by someone else. For example, the Oriental erotic. For example, there is a psychoanalyst, David Menard, which is a woman, is a psychoanalyst who wrote a book about Deleuze and psychoanalysis, in which she says that in some way what Deleuze and Guattari were meaning when they were talking about the plateau, the continuous plateau of intensity, referring to Gregory Bateson, was something that had to do with the Oriental erotism. And there are, she was saying, the Oriental erotism never get to the orgasm, no? Which is the translation, the French translation of Deleuze and Guattari when they say, no, continuous plateau of intensity that doesn't get the orgasm. Bateson is using the word climax or climax, whatever. Climax is Latin. Climax is an Americanization of climax. But climax is an apex, something that get to an apex, epicality. Even in the narrative, you have apex. No, for example, climax. When the narrative is an usual narrative in the modernity or usual narrative in general, there is a climax, no? When you know, arrive to a point in which the narrative changes, no? And he was talking about the possibility to go again and again and again a continuous plateau of intensity with not going to get the climax or the orgasm as a plateau and as Deleuze and Guattari are talking. So this is the first connection that I found in my studying, when I was studying 1000 plateau, 1000 plateau, I was finding reference to Bateson. I was studying Bateson at the same time, and so I find the connection. Actually, what I was doing was that for many years earlier, I was reading Deleuze and then Bateson, but separately. And I didn't find, I didn't think about a connection until when I was reading this part of Mille Plateau in which there was this connection. So the first connection is a connection in which in some way there is, they share the idea that there is a continuous plateau of intensity with no climax, which means a lot of things, which means a lot of things. The problem is how to apply these things to therapy, because you have to apply this for therapy to therapy. Are you therapist? No, are you therapist mainly? Are you more interested in therapy or in literature and so on? It depends. What is your interest?
Well, as far as I know, all the people here in this reading group are therapists.
Oh, systemic therapist, maybe.
Yes.
Fair.
Mostly, yes.
So this idea is an idea who changes completely the idea of short-term therapy, no? The therapy as a therapy in which you have to do, 3 sessions, 7 sessions, or a brief therapy in general. Why? Because you enter in a way in which therapy has not to deal directly with the time or the temporality as the time as chronos, or the time in the time that goes on from a past to a future or something like this, but more as a therapy as well. You're Greek, you're better than me in what does it mean chronos and what does it mean aion, which is another way of the ancient Greeks to say time, but we don't have when we think at time in Western society, we think about chronos, so the time that goes on. But we know that the ancient people in Greece, they're calling about aion, exactly, or even kairos, which is another word very important. Kairos is the moment in which you have the occasion. So kairos is the evenementiality of something that happens, and aion is a kind of time in which there is no something that goes from the past to the future in some way. The aion is something that is the time as a space in some way, the time as a space. So as a place in which, as Heraclitus say, time is, the aion is a child who plays, Aion is a child who plays, aion has been translated.
Excuse me, can you repeat that? Because the parasites came back. Ion is a child of?
What do you want me to repeat exactly? The phrase,
Yes.
time is a child who plays. This is Ion in Heraclitus. Heraclitus Ion
Is a child of place.
Aidos. A child, I don't remember the ancient Greek. I lost a lot of the connection, but it was the Ion is the child who plays. So the position of the child, it is very interesting, this idea, because I think is the very Deleuzian and Guattarian idea, is the idea of becoming child, no? Becoming child. Is the child, when you see a child who is playing, in his, in the garden or wherever, in his room, and you call him because it's time to eat, more simply, So Peter, come, it's time to eat, and Peter doesn't listen, because it's, it is inside. It is he is inhabiting, he's dwelling with the play he is doing. In the very moment he doesn't listen, and then you insist, Peter, come, it's time to eat, and he says, I'm coming, I'm coming, but he goes on with his play, and so. And plays, I'm coming, this kind of, position in which I am coming, but I will not come. I am coming, but I will not come, because it is more interesting to me now to have the play, to deal with the play I'm doing now. And I insist with the word play and not game, because it's not a game, it's a play in some way, it's playing. And this is something that has to do also with Gregory Bateson, because in Gregory Bateson there is a seminar, an entire seminar titled "This is Play." This is play. So even there, Bateson is talking about play as something that is different from what happens in our everyday lives, or something that happens inside our everyday life, but that we don't conceptualize, or we don't take care of, or we are not interested in general, So this is a play, and play is therapy, play is art, play is everything that is outside of what we can call functioning or working out in some way, it is something that is still there. So the idea of psychotherapy in this case changes completely, because the therapy is not anymore so interested in the results of therapy, in the functioning of therapy, in the what they call the efficiency of therapy, the working out of therapy, but it is more interesting with the process of therapy. It's not the efficacy of the therapy, but it's the process of therapy, in the sense that the process is a kind of plateau continuous of intensity. So coming back to this book and what I was trying to think those days for you, the logic of the sense, the appendix of this, in the appendix of this book, you have some chapters, and the first chapter is the simulacrum and ancient philosophy, And in the second part of this, there is Lucretius and the simulacrum. So what is the simulacrum? The simulacrum is always has been thinking as something that is not important. Simulacra is not important. In Platonic idea of the ideas, and the simulacra as a mimesis of mimesis. So there are the ideas, there are the reality, and then there are the imitation of reality in the art. And this is mimesis of mimesis in some way, no? And the mimesis is a production of simulacra. And in some way, this kind of art was not very well considered by Plato. But why? Because, you know, there was something that made a difference between ideas and art. In Lucretius, and before Lucretius in Epicurus, there is another idea. So there is a famous polemic between Democritus and Epicurus. No, it is an old discussion inside philosophy. No? Karl Marx, when he got his graduation in philosophy, were discussing a dissertation. His final dissertation is about the idea of atoms in Democritus and in Epicurus. So it was for the first time telling something about the difference in this in Hegelian conceptualization. His mentor was Otto Bauer, was a new Hegelian and a student of neo-Hegelism, so a student of Hegel directly. No? Otto Bauer, and he was talking, Marx for the first time was talking about the fact that in Democritus, the very merit of Democritus was to think something, to be something that is infinitesimal. So to think the infinite as the infinite small, as the infinite little, no, what we call atom, no. So the atom is the minimal part of the material, of the Hülle, of the matter, no, the minimal part of the matter. So Democritus was a materialist, no, and this was the very merit of Democritus, being materialist, thinking at the same time that there is an infinitesimal part of the matter that we cannot perceive, we cannot, and so and so and so. At the same time, Democritus had still a Platonic aspect in his thought, which is the fact that the atoms, this minimal part of the matter, of the Hülle, I say matter, no matter, like materia, Hülle, is coming from the top to the bottom in a line. So in some way, the atoms, the percourse of the atom in Democritus is a percourse in which from the top to the bottom, the atom comes down without any possibility of changing his road, which is the philosophical, it is the philosophical conceptualization of what the Greeks, so you called Moira, or Ananke, Moira, Ananke, the destiny in some way, the Ananke, the Moira, the Fatus, the Fatus, the Ananke, the Moira, the idea of there is something that is coming from somewhere which is not good, but is the destiny of any one of us. So the perfect tragedia, the perfect representation of this is Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king, by Sophocles, for example. No, Sophocles was very important for this idea, etc., etc. Epicurus was discussing this idea with another idea. So it's fantastic, the idea of Democritus that there is a minimal part of the hule, of the matter, which is an atom. But Democritus was wrong in the idea that the atom comes from the top to the bottom in a linear way. And so, from where comes the atoms? We don't know from where comes the atoms. We are already inside the atoms. And the atoms go here and there in different kind of way, and they continuously collapse one to the other. They coach one to the other. They fist one to the other. And this is the real nature. So the real nature is the plurality of these atoms that goes here and there without any possibility to make a forecast, a prevision about it. So atoms are something that are a continuous movement. So continuous, we can rephrase this is in a continuous plateau of intensity, or we can say this like a continuous complexity of the nature inside, no? So you see here that in some way Epicurus and Lucretius, for the first time, they thought that in the 17th century, Spinoza was saying, so natur, Deus sive natura. So there is no something that is transcendental, that comes from the up to the bottom. But there is the God, which is exactly the nature. So the trees are God, the animals are God, the earth is God. God is immanent to us. What Spinoza was calling with the term substance. He was using the term of substance, which is a typical term who was using Aristotle, not Plato, because Plato was more connected with essence. There is a fantastic book by Paul Ricoeur about Plato as the essence and Aristotle as the substance. So substance, something that stays substance, no? But at the same time, the difference between the other thinker in Spinoza recapitulating this idea of Epicurus and Lucretius, and of course other philosophers. You can find it in another book, which is Difference and Repetition, the history of philosophy, following this idea of the monism in some way, the monism. There is no dual existence. There are no two ontologies. There is one ontology, in the sense there is a monism. There is no a transcendental way of something else behind the nature in some way, no? And so this was something that was very interesting in Spinoza, because when Spinoza says the substance has infinite attributes, and thus, as human beings, we are allowed to get two of these infinite attributes that the substance has. And those two aspects are the mind and the body. But there is another aspect, which is that the mind and the body are not disconnected, as in Descartes, as in Cartesius. No, are not disconnected, but they are connected one to the other. The theory of the affects. So there is the second, the third, and the third part of the Ethics by Spinoza is all on the theory of the affects. So the theory of the affects is understood later on by Nietzsche when he calls about the willness of might. So the change of our willness in some way, the variation of our potence, variation of potence, variation of might, whatever you can call it, variation of might. And this is very important for psychotherapy, and psychotherapy has to deal with this, with the affects, the percept and the affects. I wrote an article on it in a book, in a number of Annual Critical Psychology, a journal directed by a friend of mine, Ian Parker. And in this journal was the editor of this journal is a systemic therapist from Australia, Maria Nichterland, who was editing all the. And I was writing a chapter, and the chapter of mine was percept and affect with desire. So the connection between percept, affect, and desire. So I was forced to talk about Spinoza, because Spinoza is the philosopher who put together this aspect of mind and body and creates a philosophy of the affects. So this is the reason, because Deleuze was calling Kant is a philosopher for philosophers, Spinoza is a philosopher for non-philosophers, in the sense, non-philosopher in the sense people who think about the nature, people who think about the material things, what is going on. And this idea now are belonging to what is called a current of philosophy that is called now relational materialism, relational materialism, who has a lot of reference in the Deleuze thought. I don't know who are actually relational materialism. I'm not so attached to ism in general, to ism, but I think that I'm a good, fantastic thinker is, for example, the Mexican one who lives in the United States, not Paul, the other one, or Steven Stigler, for example, or for example, Bruno Latour, or for example, the one that is the Mexican one is fantastic, is taught. His name is, can you help me? Because you know probably the person I am mentioning. In this moment, I have not the word, when the word is coming, but it will come, the name, sooner or later. I can tell you that you can find a lot of lessons of him, or even on Deleuze, on YouTube, in English. He's from Mexico. He's a fantastic thinker, and his name is sorry.
Never mind.
Yeah, of course. But this is the idea. The idea is about, and so you can understand a lot of concepts that Deleuze was and Guattari were giving. For example, what in English is called assemblage, which in French is agencement. And I prefer the word agencement, and I don't think that the English translation is a perfect translation, because agencement requires subject as agent. Assemblage is something that not necessarily requires a subject. Assemblage is something. So it is the difference between desiring machine and usual machine. Desiring machine are connected with the subjectivity, with the subjectivation. So what do they mean, Deleuze and Guattari, when they say, for example, Rizzomente? One of the things they say is, we are trying to reverse the idea that the subject has expressions, because it's not the subject that have expression. There is not something like a structure, which is a subject that makes expressions. It is quite the contrary. It is the expression who subjectivize the subject. You can find something similar, for example, in Judith Butler, when she say when she talks about performative identification, for example, no? Performative identification. So the identification is something that comes moment by moment. So there is not a kind of subject, a structure this is against Lacanianism, for example, no? Lacan says there is a subject in some way that is still connected with the subject that becomes a subject after, the entrance in the symbolic order and so on and so on. But we have to think, when we think at the philosophy of Deleuze, that there is no something like a subject before the expression, what they call, Deleuze and Guattari call, this is an idea of Guattari, I think, faciality. Faciality. In French is visageté. Visageté. So the expression of the subject. So this is very interesting, no? You see, the expression of the subject is not, it is something they say, for example, Guattari says, the expression of the subject, so the faciality has always to do with what? Say, what has always, so there are other people, no, Ekman and those kind of people, psychiatrists, they say the expression of a face are connected with the emotion and so on. No, he says the expression of faciality, the expression of face, is connected with the power. This is interesting, no? What does it mean that faciality is connected with the power? It means that in our expressions, we can have a dominant faciality or we can have a dissentive faciality. So the dominant faciality is the faciality of the power. The dissident faciality is the faciality of the subject that doesn't fit the power. The expression of, well, for example, another philosopher who was connected with Deleuze, who gave a fantastic lecture of Deleuze, who was Jacques Derrida, was saying, for example, the word difference, which is not difference, it's something different from different, is a different of different. In some way, faciality is the dissension, the difference, something that you see when you see a face of, I don't know, what in psychiatry is called, a psychotic guy. This kind of, no, this kind of, if you go to the theater, if you go to see, for example, a movie about Tadeusz Kantor, Tadeusz Kantor was a Polish art director in theater. He was a man of theater, and he was doing the Dead Class, which was a theater piece by Tadeusz Kantor. There is a group of elderly people, adult people that are recovering the period in which they were children in the school. So the Dead Class was the class at school. And if you see something about this, you see this face, and the movement are also strange movement, kind of what in psychiatry they call the psychotic attitude, the psychotic, clinical psychotic And he was amazed about this, telling this is Guattari particularly, but also Deleuze. Now, this is something that show something that is the difference. So the difference is not a political opposition. It's not something that start from your project. The purpose, the conscious purpose of Gregory Bateson comes here. No, it's not a conscious purpose. The dissension, the dissidence, is not antagonism. The dissidence is something that is not coming from a project, not coming from a conscious purpose. The dissident is something that you find and is uncanny for the power. So the power, the faciality of the power is the faciality that we make when we show the emotion we allow to us and the other. In a community, you have some faces, no? In a community of warrior, the face is like this, no? And this face has something to do with the power, and in this kind of community is a dominant face. And for example, this face of fear, for example, is not a good face connected to the power, or is a good face connected to the power if you are an enemy, if you are someone who must be submitted. So it's a good face. But a face that is strange, that shows something like, and so something that the eyes are different from the ones that the cognitive psychologists cannot detect. The one that when you go to the cognitive psychology, they say there are 7 emotions, there are 9 emotions, and those emotions are these, fear, disgust, and so on. And so they make a kind of elenkon, no? How do they say in Greek, no? The elenkon of the limited way of expression of emotion. No, the Deleuze and Guattari say, no, there is an infinite faciality, possibility of faciality. But the main thing is that faciality has to do with the power, has to do with the structure of the state, has to do with the institution.
If I may ask, is faciality an expression of affect, of being affected?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The faciality is the expression, is one of the expression of the affect and being affected. So in some way you are affected by, in Spinoza is Peter and Paul, but he's an example. No, I meet Peter. Peter is one is a person that is antipathic. So he's a person that I want to avoid because he wants money by me, because he gives me the glass to make lenses. No, because Spinoza was making lenses. And he received the glass from someone who was the one that in change of it was making credit to it and pretended to be paid. So Peter was antipathic. So when I met Peter, my potence, my variation of potence decreases. And when I met Paul, who was Paul? Paul was a friend. So probably was a guy who was going to his shop and say, I need a lot of lenses. So sell me all the lenses you have and I pay to you by cash immediately. And so on. So he was talking about Paul as a friend. Paul as a friend who was the one who, when he was meeting Paul was increasing his variation of potence. So he enjoyed when he encountered Paul, as you know, when you encounter an old friend and so on, or a relative of you that you don't see since many times and so on, you are enjoying yourself. And when you see a danger or someone who want to the other, you became afraid, or you became sad and so on. So this decreases your variation of potence. No?
May I center this discussion, this argument, in your 2010 paper with Maria Nisterlein for relearning our alphabet? You have this example of a session. I suppose you remember.
You mean the session in which I was in Massachusetts?
Yes, that session.
I was in
was your facility then? I mean, can you comment on that?
This is a perfect example. Thank you, Yorgos, for this, because this is a fantastic example. So the example is this man. So I was there, and I was there in a kind of meeting in which there is training, no? The people who come all over the world to see us. I was part of the us. The us were me, Marcelo Pachman, Carlos Lusky, and other people that were supposed to be, the ones that knew and so on. So, and I go because they pay me, and I am like Spinoza. So if they pay me, I enjoy in some way. But I'm not thinking at myself as a, I think at myself as an ass, that goes. I bring this body. I learned by Cecchino. Cecchino was saying to me, I was saying to him, you go here and there, but what is? Oh, I don't know. I bring my body with myself, and when they ask me something, I answer, something like this. No, I went there, and immediately there was this family that was presented by a group of psychologists. The group of psychologists was a group of people that were following this situation, which is a typical situation of the welfare state in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is a state in which there is a good welfare state comparing to the rest of the United States. And usually the welfare states in the United States is not something that they give to you except money. So they give to you money. And there is this philosophy which comes from the American Constitution, in which the state cannot provide to you something, but the state gives you money, and you has to be free to use your money whatever you want, because this is liberal. This is the liberalism in some way. No, you are free to buy whatever you want in the market. No? And so there was this family, and the family was composed by a mother, which was not actually a real mother, but a woman. This woman was obese, and the woman was not walking. So he came with a wheelchair to the session, a strong wheelchair to keep his weight, and at the same time to move. And then there was the father. The father was a tiny man. The husband of this woman was a tiny man who loved a lot to drink. And then there were two children and present in the session. One was a child of 4 years old. The other one was a woman, a young woman of 14. And there was another woman of 15 that was pregnant, but he was fleeing. So it was escaping to the family. And in this very moment, they came to try to understand how to recover this girl that went away to the family, that escaped to the family. At the same time, when I was there, and I speak fluent Spanish in general, I speak Spanish like an Argentinian person. I was many times in Argentina, so I have this. But I am Italian, so I don't speak. I'm not a native, so I speak French, speak Spanish as well as I speak English, more or less the same. And what happened? It was that I wasn't able to understand the word by them, And the father and the mother, so the two elderly couple in the session, they were not speaking English, and they were in Massachusetts. So there are a lot of people in Massachusetts that speak just the Spanish they speak in Puerto Rico, and they don't speak actually English. And a lot of them, you can find a lot of them in asylum or in, psychiatric units. I was many times in psychiatric units in Massachusetts because I had the chance to work in Massachusetts inside psychiatric units and so on. And I met patients that in not talking English, in living in Massachusetts, particularly elderly people, they are, hospitalized because they don't, have even the clues to go in a shop and say, I would like to have, something to eat. And so those two supposed parents were like this. And they got from the welfare money. So the mother was getting money for her obesity and also for her impossibility to walk. And the father was getting money because he was declared mentally retarded. And he was also an alcoholic. So he was an alcoholist. And so for any one of these, label they got money. So they are also fostering two nephews. And they got money for fostering two nephews, the foster parents of those two young women. And then they were fostering also another nephew who was, which is not a nephew, was a child, who was given to them to a woman, a Puerto Rican woman, who was an abuser of crack. So was crack dependent. So she was asking to this couple to take care of them. So they were able to raise up children, even though they were in this situation. For any one of these, they got money. So, and they were declaring that for living, they got $40,000 per year for their living. Was not that much, but it is not even so bad, because $40,000 for 5 people to live, it is something that permits to you to pay the rent, to pay to have the heater, to pay to have a tiny house, but it is something. So they received for the welfare state a lot of money, provided that they got, something that was a diagnosis for any one of them. So they were talking English perfectly when they were talking about paraplegia, when they talking about mental retardation, no? When they talk about something that was connected to the diagnosis, they were talking about, so they were speaking like blah, 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 alcoholist, blah, 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 mental retardation, blah, 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 something like this, no? They were talking about, él es un alcoholist, ella es una, he got, no, él tenía también mental retardation. So they were speaking perfectly the diagnosis in, so when they realized, because they were asking to me how to get a change by fostering to adoption in the young children, 4-year-old, that, by the way, was sleeping on the chair, quiet and perfectly pacific. And they asked me, we need to do that. And I say to them, well, I am an ass over here. So they called me from Italy to come here. Well, I am a licensed psychotherapist, of course, but here in Massachusetts, even though I was working here when I was a student and so on, here in Massachusetts, I have not any power. So I am more, outside, more an outsider in this state than you are as Puerto Rican people. And they started to laugh about it. And after that, we were talking about something different. And the climate so they changed their faciality from, a dominant faciality of submission to a kind of strange faciality in which I was simply a guy who was listening to them, as well as a priest. I don't know, something like this. No, I have no power, but I am here to listen to you. I am an anthropologist. So there is Chloe who's asking something.
Yeah. So, caro collega, noi sappiamo che voi bergamaschi siete molto giocarelloni. So, my remark is exactly on that. In the translation of Mille Plateau by Brian Masumi, faciality is for the year 0 and has the icon of Jesus Christ, who with his face absolutely placid, absolutely calm and serene. It's the face, the faciality of the power. But you trying to empower this notion, you spontaneously made some grimaces in your lecture that exactly points the other side, because faciality has another side. I think that this is the notion of what you said as before. The other side is that it's against power, that it is something that can deconstruct the power. And what matters here very much, and you made it very clear in your book, in your remarkable essay, is that is in the matter of fact is a block of sensation. It's not only affects, as Yorgos said before, but it's a block of affects and percepts. It's a block of sensation that brings in the matter of art, and I don't speak for art as the art, one of the three houses of in what is philosophy, but I speak for the art in psychotherapy.
Absolutely.
So I think I would like you to elaborate a little on how we can combine in teaching or in analyzing, how we can combine the stability from the one side, the stability of the art that must be something constant and diagrammatical to be understood, and from the other side, the desire that comes out every moment, changes everything, doesn't know limits, doesn't know obstacles. How could you combine in this? How could you combine these two sides? And what is your position? Is really psychoanalysis in our day in its proper place? It's something innovative, as in the time of Freud, or and I have in mind more than Freud, Ferenczi, which are very important for us, Ferenczi, because it was excluded from orthodoxy since the 50s. So how we can combine these two poles, and how can we constitute this miracle that psychoanalysis made? How we can probably we should think to combine to new forms as psychoanalysis or queer analysis, and I would like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Caro
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe, for this remarkable observation. I just want to finish my account on this because probably has to do with what you were telling now. And the finishing is that suddenly I went out and I saw my colleagues. And among my colleagues, there is a very Deleuzian Chilean psychotherapist whose name is Cristobal Bonelli, who was also a student of mine many years ago in the school of Milan. And he was telling something about, probably because he had this intuition from his experience, life experience, in Chile, what was going on several years ago, and so the dictatorship and so on and so on. He was also trained as an anthropologist. Cristobal said to me something that I reported inside. When I came out, I say, I am not here to change anything. I feel myself as an ethnographer, or an anthropologist who was watching this situation. And I was telling what I wrote in this article that Georgi was mentioning with Maria Nichterlein. After that, I came out and I said, what I can help them, tell me something. And Cristobal was saying to me, I see now this family, that is inside a tunnel. No? From one hand, there is an hospital. And from the other hand, there is a bar, a pub, something like this. Massachusetts is the hospital, and Puerto Rico is the pub. So if they go to Puerto Rico, he said, they are going to die because they lost every, grant from Massachusetts and so on, and probably this man is going to die and so on. If they remain to Massachusetts, they are going to live, but the way of living is this one, living in a hospital. And actually, Massachusetts is really a hospital in the sense that, it is something that it is strange, when you go, well, this is Bergamaschi, for example. Bergamaschi, a lot of time, there are a lot of trees around Bergamo, and because there is a lot of, and Bergamaschi sometimes are walking in a mountain or in a park, and when they have the desire to make pee, they go to a tree and make pee over there. But in Massachusetts, if you do it, we are sure they get it. There is a policeman that get you and give you $300 of ticket for peeing on the tree. So when I went inside, I say, there is a colleague of mine that say like this and this and this. They were very grateful to me, but I was not responsible for this. I was something that was taking an idea and making another idea. So, but I think that this is exactly what I was saying when I say subjectivation. So the fact that you express, and now we are coming to Jesus Christ and so on, that you express something in the subjectivation moment by moment, following the desire, which is not the need. So the desire is something that makes you to go toward your desire or toward your passion in some way, And so you are never aware in the sense of the psychologists. Now, awareness is now the mainstream of psychologists. You will never get aware of what are you doing, but you must be aware about what to do in this relationship, in the singularity of this relationship. Then I think that in some way my job is a job of, is a work of art. Well, a work of art, not in the sense of art with the A, the capital A, because, you know, I feel more than an art crafter, than an artist in the wide sense, because we have to preserve a kind of humility, no? And I think I am an art crafter and not an artist, but I think that art is has at the same time another position in the ontology, which Spinoza is explained very well. So art belongs with the substance, and the substance goes outside our possibility of grasping it entirely. And this is something that has to deal with art. So when the Guattari in What is Philosophy? Question point. No, what is philosophy? Question point. It's unusual to make a question point in the title of a book. They insist to make the question point. What is art? No, what is philosophy? And then they talk about art. No, in my view, what I found about them is the same thing that I found in an artist who wrote a book in which whose title is Portrait of a Young Man as an Artist, no, which is James Joyce. And James Joyce, in this book, Portrait of a Young Man as an Artist, who was the first title of Stephen Hero, which is a little bit different, but more or less is the same novel. There are a lot of differences, but it's the same idea, the same novel. In the portrait, Joyce makes a philosophical discussion about aesthetic, starting from Thomas, arriving to Spinoza. He doesn't mention Spinoza, but the point of arrival is Spinoza. So he's saying it is exactly the same thing in some way that did Epicurus and Lucretius toward Democritus. No, in some way he says, well, it is fantastic, the aesthetic of Aquinas. No, why? Because Aquinas, for the first time, says that for aesthetic you must have access to another way of watching at the thing. No? So you see the thing not as something that you should utilize in this moment. So you see a book, for example, no, a book is a good example. This is a book, no, and I can utilize the book, no, and so, for example, reading something on the book. Now, this is the utilization of the book, but I can see the book as something else, no. So I can see the book, for example, in this way, no, I see the gray, and so I can give a judgment about it. No, the first thing that I see is something that is a gray cover, more or less like argent gray, very argent. And I can see the book Roman Jacobson, title in Italian, Infantile Language and Aphasia, and something like this. So it became a whole, and I, in the same time, I keep it out from the ground, no? The third movement is the clarity. So the clarity is when I see the book as a book, in the aesthetic sense. No? And he was saying, this is probably the mistake that Aquinas did. Well, in Joyce, in Daedalus, is not Daedalus, they say, is not, Daedalus doesn't criticize Aquinas. He criticized the Jesuits who were interpreting Aquinas. When they say about clarity, they are saying something that comes from the heaven. Say something like this. But no, the clarity is the quiditas. You make an example of a chest, no? Of a, how do you say, basket, a basket, no? Make the example. A basket is a basket after you see, the connection of the parts, and then you keep the basket outside, and then you see the basket. This is a basket. This is a way of watching things that is not a utilitarian way of seeing a thing, but is an aesthetic way of seeing a thing. And if you are a painter, for example, you can paint this basket. And this basket, in the way you painted it, remains forever. But it doesn't remain forever a basket that you can utilize, because you cannot utilize a basket in a painting. You cannot you cannot eat the apple of Cézanne, the famous apple of Cézanne. You cannot drink from the bottles of Morandi. No, the bottles of Morandi, or the apple of Cézanne. No, you cannot eat the apple of Cézanne. You cannot drink from the bottle of Morandi. They are strange bottles. This is a strange apple. But the problem is not that they are strange or not strange. The problem is that they are works of art when you see this in a kind of way that is absolutely a way of the way in which the substance, so the stability, comes to your perception. In this very moment, there is no author, and there is no time. So, what is a work of art? A work of art is something that remains. The author can die, or dies usually, no? The people dying. So the creator of the work of art dies, maybe could be forgotten. But when you see the work of art, you see this is a work of art. So in the museum you go and see, oh, this is the Guernica by Picasso, this is the Nicche de Samotracia in Louvre, or the Gioconda, and so on. But what you see is not Leonardo da Vinci or the author of the Nicche di Samotracia. Is the work of art is the stability of this gaze. So there are a lot of people that go there just for fashion or for other things. But when you see the Gioconda, you can tell a lot of things about the Gioconda. You can tell a lot of things about, the Velázquez painting of Las Meninas, the gaze of the same Velázquez. When you go outside the canvas, you see that the eyes of Velázquez are following you, this strange effect. That is not per se something that is art, because this is technique. But in the very moment in which you create a product of art, this makes the difference. And this difference is the stability of this kind of work. So something that is stable, it's not transcendental, but is stable in our lives, which is something that is granted by history.
So can you make the analogy with psychotherapy more clear with stability and art?
Well, psychotherapy, what is psychotherapy? Who is the artist in psychotherapy? Is not a great artist. We remember Freud, we remember, as you said, Ferenczi, no? Why we remember Ferenczi more than Freud? And I personally remember Ferenczi more than Freud. Because Ferenczi had different kind of ideas. He was thinking about the relationship as therapy. So when I got in love with Ferenczi, it was in the very moment in which I heard Luigi Boscolo say, the therapy is the relationship. Don't worry about other things. You can talk in therapy about food. You can talk about in therapy about religion, you can talk about politics, whatever you want. But the therapy is not what you are talking about. The therapy is the relationship you make with the other person. So what in Ferenczi was called reciprocal analysis. And so what we call now self-disclosure, for example, the fact that you can be able to talk about yourself. And disclosure, self-disclosure is not just telling to the other, the person who attends therapy, that you did this and this when you were young and so on. Self-disclosure can be also the fact that you feel yourself in the accounts of the other, that you could have been like this, or you were like this in some moments. So any one of us has had a controversial life. So psychotherapy is not for people that were born in. We have this joke in Italian, which is this guy is born with the S in the butter, which is something that means is someone who has been lucky, who has a good family, middle range, middle class or upper class family. They were all, polite and so on and so on. And never happened to him until his 40s. He went to the university, got, good votes and so on. No, therapy is not for these people. Therapy for these people that had traumas, different kind of way of life, that had, a father who had a crack, and a father who was depressed, a mother who was, something like this. I can't tell about my life, no, but I think that I'm sure that any one of us, have passed through a difficult kind of life, which is something that has to do with the real life out there. The real life out there is that we have a war in Ukraine now. The real life out there is that there are in Iran, there are hundreds of people that are killed in this very moment. And I have an Iranian student now that is following me for the final dissertation, and we are talking about the fact that he couldn't go back to Iran for this reason, and he would like to have in Iran a kind of world in which he could express his idea. He's a philosopher. The first degree was in philosophy, and now he's going to make a degree, a master degree in clinical psychology. So what is art in this? The therapy is a product of art because in some way there is something stable in psychotherapy, which is the product that in some way Ferenczi was giving to us. So the relationship. So what is the relationship? The relationship is, the therapeutic relationship is a lot of, let's call it narratives, but can be also anti-narratives. No, narratives in the wider sense of, so Finnegan's Wake is a narrative, or the Artaud poetry in glossolalia is also narrative. In this sense, narrative is not something that has a sense, but it is a product that you can face and find something that make you to think, give you to think, something that give you to think. So in this way, thank you, Chloe, for this. What I mean is that art is something that remains, and therapy is inside a product of art. When the therapy changes the life of people that attend to therapy. It's the same thing that when I read a novel, if the novel is changing my life, it is a product of art. When I see a painting, and if this painting is changing my life, what does it mean? Not changing in general, changing moment by moment. I can see Las Meninas 200 times, and every time I see Las Meninas, there is something that changes my life. I can go to Madrid to see Guernica by Picasso. I can come to Athens and see, you know, the rest of the Agora in Athens, the Acropolis and so on, and it changes my life at any time. I go to Sicily and I go to see the rest of Agrigento, Girgenti, and it changes the temples of Apollon over there, and it changes my life anytime I go. And when I read again a novel, they change my life again. Recently, I read again a work by an Italian writer, who is Dino Buzzati, and the Desert of the Tartar, Il Deserto dei Tartari. I read it when I was young, and actually I probably didn't finish it because it seemed to me to be boring. I read it again when I was older, and I found something that was very interesting for me. And I read for the third time recently, and I wrote a review of it. I read it recently, and I found a fantastic feelings in the way in which this Drogo, the main character, whose name is Drogo, Captain Drogo, Tenant Drogo, Captain Drogo, Colonel Drogo, because in his life he made the grade in military, and that remained inside the Fortezza Bastiani, the fortress Bastiani. He remained there all time long, thinking that he had to go outside. You remember the words, if you are listening to Tom Waits' song, there is a song in which I spend all of my life thinking that I'll go. And so, no, it's the same. Tom Waits is he knows the Italian literature very well. He had a lot of links with Italy. One is Roberto Benigni, but he knows a lot of Italian literature. He probably read the English version of the Deserto dei Tartari, of this novel. It is a novel in which he goes away when he dies, and in the travel, in going away, when he comes back home, he dies. It's fantastic because it's something that say something to your life, to my life, I should have been somewhere else, but I am here. And there has been a lot of times in which I could choose to go somewhere else, or to do something else, or to choose to do this as something to do, for example, with the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. I always can change something. But sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Actually, I do always. Even when I decide to remain here, I am changing myself, deciding to remain here. This is the concept of responsibility. Responsibility is the fact that in my life, I am like an Epicurean atom. Even when I stay here, I am moving in staying here. So, for example, when I was young, in 1990, I was in Amherst, I was in Massachusetts for the first time, and I was studying there. Inside of my Ph.D. course, I decided to go for a while at the University of Amherst. I wasn't in love with Barnett Pierce, Vernon Cronin, Lynn Hoffman, Karol Slutsky was nearby there. There was also the mathematics, the Hans von Glasersfeld. And so there was a kind of, enclave in which I was willing to go because I would like to. And when I arrived there, it was something for me, something for me, and it changed my life. But when I was arriving there, every time in my mailbox, at that time there was no the mailbox on internet. The mailbox was a piece of wood in which they put a piece of paper. And in my mailbox, Pietro Barbetta, there was always something that offered me to remain there to teach. So if you want, you can come and teach in this school in Philadelphia, the Annenberg School of Communication, and so on and so on. And I could do a lot of application, and probably if I did some application, I probably now should be somewhere in Massachusetts or wherever to do something different or to do the same thing, I don't know. But I decided to change my life, not to go there. And there was a lot of reasons, because I didn't have the force to ask my wife and the two children, tiny children that I had at that time, to come with me in the United States. So it was easier for me to spend my life in Italy and have relationship with the American people and so on. Then I decided that it was better to have a relationship with Latino American people, Greek people, Spanish people, Portuguese people. I don't like very much the so-called Anglo-Saxon, New Englander and English people, because they pretend to you every time to change your language and to use the Anglo language in a paratactic system and so on. This is another chapter of my life. I am very, polemic with the way in which they make referees to your articles, because they say, oh, your article was fantastic. Can you put this phrase in paratactic system? And I say, no, I am a Baroque person. I don't like to put it, in paratactic system is a phrase, point, another phrase, point, another phrase, point. And in hypotactic is you put a phrase, then comma, and then, by the way, there was something then, and comma, and by the way, there was something then, in nested one to the other. I prefer the nesting way of writing, the paratactic way of making myself clear, because I think that clearness is not a virtue, is not necessarily a virtue. When I was a student, and even now, when I read again the Roman Jakobson things, there are a lot of things that I don't understand immediately. And I am, grateful for Roman Jakobson, for, from, G. Deleuze or whatever, Levi-Strauss, whatever a thinker is, to not be clear to me completely, because it stimulates me to think, trying to understand what he has written or she has written, try to understand it, but in the same time, making something that is different from his thought. So I, for example, say to my students, don't go to read handbooks of psychology, because handbooks of psychology are dangerous for your mind.
Yes. Yes, probably.
Yeah.
Disciplinary.
So how much
I would
time
like,
we...
yes, let's be aware of time. I'd like to open the floor to questions and comments and from the participants. Do you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, or would like for Pietro to discuss a little bit something that was vague, or you need more details?
Or something that disagreement, or something that
Yes.
discussing something, and so on. So I was so clear. I'm not happy to be so clear. I was too Anglo-Saxon.
Well,
Chloe,
if I may, as my colleagues are thinking and put their questions, dobbiamo dire, siamo molto in debito, sto Giorgio, a Giorgio, ma nei colleghi italiani, perché durante la dittatura eravamo accoglienti, protetti di colleghi e di compagni italiani, membri della lotta continua, Eri De Luca, tante persone. And in this time, I had the opportunity to hear a lecture about Elvio Facinelli, that was like an epiphany for me, and put all this mark for me the turning point of psychiatry with psychoanalysis to psychoanalysis to court. This is very much important for me. And what I'm giving in my lecture, what I'm teaching in political psychoanalysis that I'm teaching, is exactly that psychoanalysis is not something dead and must be always rejuvenated the way Freud desired it. And so I mentioned before that a great breakthrough in our days is this compromise between the queer, the LGBTQ persons with psychoanalysis. They were before very much apart. Psychoanalysis rejected them as a neurosis, as a Oedipal matter, and the queer people consider psychoanalysis something out of reach. Now, there's no such a condition that we're working to make psychoanalysts available to the last person in the world. So, to pay back my debt, I must recommend that we owe you, not bergamaschi questa volta, ma tu italiani, primo questa dissociazione psichiatria e psicanalisi, e di un'altra parte il fatto che
go ahead, because I'm trying
okay,
to
you can wait you
book.
And from the other hand, I must mention the big matter of anti-psychiatry. The young people of today, even the most brilliant like George, can't imagine how anti-psichiatria, Basaglia e tutti questi grandi psichiatri erano operanti in cambiare tutto in questo campo di malattia mentale. Credo che the very notions, the equivalence of what you said, what you taught us today, is that things must always go on, that something can be stopped, something must be territorialized, always a flow or always a deteriorization. So this is what I take with me from your lecture today. Always in the move, always changing. Thank you, caro Barbetta.
Pietro. Thank you, Chloe. I want to show you this book, which is in English, and that if you can take notes. It's more a literary book, but it's something, the title is The Years of Alienation in Italy, from the economic boom to the years of lead. In this book, I wrote a chapter, and this chapter is in English about Elvio Facchinelli.
Ah, bravo, bravo.
So the title of my chapter is Psychoanalysis in Milan in the Age of Disalienation, the case of Elvio Facchinelli. And I talk about Elvio Facchinelli and the way he changed psychoanalysis, remaining a psychoanalyst until his death. He was prematurely dead at 60, remaining a psychoanalyst, but challenging the authoritarian way of psychoanalysis, recalling Sandor Ferenczi. So he was recovering Sandor Ferenczi. I remember, because I was militating in Lotta Continua at that time, for example, I remember when there was the big crisis of the beginning of the years of lead, and a lot of people changed their mind, and we remained, in a vacuum. We didn't know. I was in my 20s, so I was baffled about life and so on in this very moment. And I was going with other people, we were going to ask people like Elvio Facchinelli to enter into analysis. And it was funny, because Elvio doesn't say come to analysis. He says something like, no, it's not necessary that you do psychoanalysis. Do like the feminists, he said. Do like the women and the feminist movement. And we said, what is what they do, because we were not allowed to go into the women movement. So what they do exactly? And Elvio said, well, Lea Melandri, who is my mate, I know very well, she's a friend of mine, Lea, no? At that time, say, well, Lea Melandri is telling to me that they are doing self-help. What does it mean, self-help? Well, they were doing about sexuality. They were talking about sexuality, the organs, the different kind of organs, the clitorideus organs, the vaginal organs, the anal organs, the mouth organs, the ear organs, and we said, but we are males. What about? And not males cannot talk to them. So it was a revelation. Males cannot talk about their sexuality. No, young males in their 20s cannot talk each other about their own sexuality. When they ejaculate, how they ejaculate. They cannot talk about it with other men. It is interesting. Women talk at every moment about it. And this is the big difference. So I realized that there was something that was not going right with men in general. And probably from this moment on, I was thinking about my being a man, an heterosexual man, and something that there is something inside of myself that, and so I decided to read a lot of, Julia Kristeva works, Lucy Irigaray works, and all, these feminist women, even Italian, Teresa De Laurentiis, Rosi Braidotti, and so on and so on, Regina Mortari, Alessandra Cavarero, Spanish woman. So this philosophical and psychoanalytical position, women position, because this is the real Ferencial. So psychoanalysis is a locus of welcoming people and creating relationships. It's not a fortress. And the person who comes to analysis of psychotherapy is not as well a fortress to be conquered, but is a child wounded child. So in any person who comes, parents were saying, I see a wounded child. So this is something that we have to deal with. And this is hard.
So is systemic therapy also a locus of acceptance and welcoming?
I think that absolutely yes. The characteristic of the systemic position that added something more is the fact that the systemic position doesn't see the individual subject. It doesn't see the unconscious just a product of the individual subject, but the unconscious is something that has to do with society, with imaginary world, and so on. And it is inside the relationship. So the difference of systemic, the contribute of the systemic practice is the fact that the subject is not just the individual subject, but is a collective subject that has which is the atomic way of seeing life in Epicurus and in Lucretius, the complexity, the contribution of the systemic is the aesthetic of complexity. So seeing the complexity as an aesthetic product, which is a work of art in some way. So a work of art that does not, nature is a work of art that has no author. And any work of art in some way has no author. This is something that was saying also Foucault, and so there was this idea, no, there is no author. So there is the name of the author, but the history of madness was written by Foucault, but it is still a product. It is still the most important essay of the 20th century, even though Foucault is not here. So mainly the history of madness is the most important essay of the 20th century. Forget about Sein und Zeit or this bullshit by Heidegger. I don't like it. Forget about Heidegger. He was a big pretender. No, was a big pretender. A Nazi.
So are there any questions or comments, or I suppose you have moved us, affected us in a lot of ways, and we need to digest all these ideas and information and differences. For me, a very big issue of discussion is your recent book with Umberto and Maria Esther Cavanis and Brit, but maybe you can discuss it again in May, where in our reading
This
group.
one.
Yes, that one.
Mm-hmm. This one. Yes, we can go ahead with this one. And what I wrote on Metalogos, because there was in Metalogos.
Yes, there is a recent video on Metalogos.
After the video, I wrote a comment about the video in which I am trying to explain the way we worked for this book, which was not coherence, but was main coordination. This is something that I learned by Barnett Peirce. I don't know if you know Barnett Peirce. Barnett Peirce was a philosopher, social psychologist who was a professor at Amherst University. That he went to La Jolla University in Chicago, but he was in Amherst when I was there. And he wrote this book whose title is Communication and the Human Condition, that I was translating into Italian. And he was telling about the fact that what we call the postmodern at that time there was this fashion to call about postmodernism as postmodern. He was writing something that was outside. He was using cosmopolitan communication and not postmodernism. He was also afraid of this word postmodernism. And he was telling what is cosmopolitan communication. Cosmopolitan is a word used also by Jacques Derrida, for example. No? Cosmopolis de tout le monde, encore une fois. No? It was a discourse of Derrida to the parliament of the writer in Strasbourg before the die. And cosmopolitan communication. He said cosmopolitan communication is different from modernist communication because modernism looks for coherence. Cosmopolitan communication looks for coordination, and coordination is not necessarily coherence. It's very important, this tense, this position. Coordination is not necessarily coherence. So when you come to understand coherence, when you go to another level, which is not the level of the content of the thought. And it was something that we discussed also, for example, with Maria Nitter. She was pushing us to go to coherence, and I was not agreeing with her about it, so she quit. She was part of the book at the very beginning, and she was not the only one. There was also Marcelo Pacone. Also, he was telling about coherence in some way, coherence. So putting together the thought of this and that and so on. And I was telling them that my effort was not about coherence, but about style. And style with its coordinations, nothing to do with be coherent in our talk as philosopher. Style is coordinate ourselves as literary writer. So the style is the way you write something. An essay cannot be coherent, but could be very interesting because of the style in which it's written. And if you read Deleuze, if you read Guattari, if you read Foucault, and so on, Stigler, and so on, Judith Butler, and this guy that I don't remember the name still, the Mexican guy that I don't remember the name, they always talk in a style. They are not so concerned about coherence. So it is not something like this. And for example, when Gilles Deleuze is making this book, which in French was titled Dialogues. I think in Italian is translated in conversazione, which is not dialogues. Conversazione is another word. I don't know if in English it's translated as conversations or as dialogues.
Excuse me, is in Greek translated now by Konstantinos Boudas, just recently, with Pernet, the dialogues with Pernet.
Dialogues with Claire Pernet. And he says something about the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon literature. What he was meaning about the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon literature. He was telling us that in the Anglo-Saxon literature, there is something that goes in medias res, so in the mid of the story immediately. So he was talking about Melville. He wrote a lot of things about Bartleby, the Scrivener, for example, no? Which is a fantastic novel, no? Whose subtitle is A History of, what what is the title, the subtitle? It's not the history of New York, it's a history of downtown, I think, something like this. In which there is the description of what was making the downtown New York, so the city of the capital of the economic world. So, and the Bartleby, the Scrivener, was a kind of, hero, as we say in literature, no, or character, but was not a real character. It was a character, an anti-character. Was a character who was making impossible to go on with work, as this lawyer was not able to give him the work that was finished, because anytime he was asking to him to do something, he was answering to him, I would prefer not. I would prefer not. So this is something that is fantastic. And, the rest was connected with this. And if you think at that time, the Anglo-Saxon literature, you have to think at least three writers. We are in the mid of the 19th century. In the mid and on in the 19th century. Bartleby, the Scrivener, was written in 1852. But there are at least two other writers that are as well as fantastic as Melville. One is Nathaniel Hawthorne. Few people know about Nathaniel Hawthorne, but Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a novel who is fantastic, which is not the Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter was fantastic, but there is another that is The House of the Seven Gables. You have to read The House of the Seven Gables, which is a fantastic novel. And the third one of this group was Edgar Allan Poe. That is well known. It was easier because it was writing short stories and so on. But in Edgar Allan Poe, you find something that is absolutely uncanny, absolutely interesting. The mystery of, the Purloined Letter, for example, of Monsieur Dupin. Monsieur Dupin is the one that is the main character in the Purloined Letter, but also in the Murders in the Morgue Street. And in Murders in the Morgue Street, in the Rue Morgue, it is something Roland Barthes tells about Conan Doyle, and Edgar Allan Poe telling to us. Conan Doyle was a writer of genre, but we have the same word in Italian, genere and genre, the same thing. So genre in English. Conan Doyle was an author of genre, and this guy, Edgar Allan Poe, was a degenerated writer. What is the difference? The difference is that Monsieur Dupin is quite different from Sherlock Holmes, because Sherlock Holmes was finding everything in rational way. Even the masting of the Hound of Baskerville, at the end there was a man who was making a plot, and it was rational. In Edgar Allan Poe, the murder of the Rue Morgue was a chimpanzee or something like that. Was a monkey. So exactly the opposite. So the irrational that comes, and I don't explain to you what happened, but the narrative is like this. No, the narrative doesn't explain to you what happened. It's a plateau continuous of intensity that doesn't come to the apex, to the climax. This is
question of style, you mean?
Yeah, question of style. Question of style.
Let's call it the signature.
Signature.
La signature.
La signature. Absolutely. Which means different things. Doesn't mean only la signature, the signature, like la firma. In Italian we have the word, different words, segnatura and firma. So signature is something that has to do with simulacra. No, simulacra is something that has to do with simulacra. So the mimesis of the mime, something that Plato was saying, this is exactly what it is interesting for us, no? Reversing Plato, the first thing is the simulacra, so la signature. Something that is in Charles Sanders' Peirce is the traces. No? What I find, no, in the I am working in a forest, in a wood, and I found the traces of a hair, for example, no? And I say, oh, those are the traces of a hair. So probably the hair is quite near here because the traces are so fresh. So the hair is quite near. So the eventuality of something that is going to happen, I'm going to see probably a hair, not the rabbit, the savage rabbit, the one who was long.
I would suggest that we call it a day, and very much thank Pietro Barbetta for his contribution in our reading group and all these interesting theories that he elaborated.
Well, thank you to you, and invite me whenever you like. And I enjoy to spend time with people that are, making systemic therapy different from the collaborative one, because the the next time we can talk about the collaborative collaborative therapy, and to talk about why I don't agree with the collaborative therapy, because collaboration is not coordination. Sometimes discussion, as we said, the atoms.
There's a clash, yes.
Clash. So I mean,
there's a clash, definitely. Okay, so thank everyone for their patience and contributions.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you,
you.
Pietro.
If you want, you can write me, and I can answer. So I think you have my
Yes, I will circulate
mail.
my email.
If you like to write me something, I can answer. And if you, I probably am founding a new school in Bergamo, just properly in Bergamo. I'm not a Bergamasco by origin, but I am Milanese. But I like Bergamo very much, and I'm opening a school next year, and we will do lessons in English, in French, and in Spanish. So if you want to come, we will make course in English also. So if you want to come to have a vacation here in Bergamo, is a very nice, and the surrounding is very nice. It's nearby Milan, so the metropolis. It is. If you want to come here for vacation or whatever, let me know. We will organize a thing in English. Absolutely.
Yes, that's an interesting proposal.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank
Nice
you to you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.